Something is shifting beneath our feet, and whether people want to admit it or not, almost everyone can feel it. There is a quiet tension in the air that did not exist before, a sense that the systems we have trusted for decades are beginning to strain, crack, and in some cases openly fail. This video is not about fear for the sake of fear, and it is not about shock value or sensationalism. It is about patterns, signals, and decisions being made at the highest levels that tell a very different story than the one being sold to the public. If you stay with me until the end of this video, you will understand why so many people feel unsettled, why the world feels heavier, and then and why walking away may be the only rational response left. Before we get into it, make sure you like this video, share it, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell and select all so you get every single Angry Guy video the moment we release it. This helps the channel, it helps the message reach more people, and it ensures you do not miss what is coming next. I also want to remind you to check out Angry's Crypto Academy, which is linked in the description of this video. If you want to learn how to protect and safeguard your assets and grow your wealth, and if you want to learn how to buy, sell, and trade crypto responsibly, go check it out now. Everything is laid out step by step, and it is built for people who understand that the old financial playbook no longer works the way it used to. And if you are enjoying these Angry Guy videos and you want to show your support, you can buy me a Red Bull using the link in the description of the video. That support goes directly into keeping this channel alive and independent. Now, let us begin because this conversation is not comfortable, but it is necessary. There is a reason so many people feel like something bad is coming, even if they cannot articulate it clearly. It is not because of social media hysteria, and it is not because people have suddenly become pessimistic for no reason. It is because there are real, measurable actions taking place at the global level that signal a loss of confidence in systems that were once considered untouchable. When countries begin to move away from long-standing financial arrangements, especially quietly and methodically, it is not done on a whim. It is done because the risk calculation has changed. We are watching that happen in real time. For decades, United States debt in the form of government bonds was treated as one of the safest places on earth to park wealth. It was not exciting. It did not promise explosive returns, but it was stable, predictable, and trusted. That trust is now eroding. Japan, one of the largest holders of our US debt, has been selling off bonds at an accelerating pace. This is not a political statement. This is not an emotional reaction. This is a financial decision made by people whose entire shit is to assess long-term risk. When Japan sells US debt, it is a signal that holding those bonds no longer makes sense under current conditions. China has followed suit, and the scale of that move cannot be understated. Nearly $1 trillion in US debt has been dumped, not gradually over generations, but decisively. That decision alone should have stopped the world in its tracks. Instead, it was met with a shrug by media outlets that have no incentive to tell people what this actually means. When a major global power decides that holding US debt is no longer worth the risk, it is not because everything is fine. It is because the future they see does not justify continued exposure. Debt only works when there is confidence that it will be honored without drastic consequences. Once confidence fades, the entire structure becomes fragile. You do not need to be an economist to understand this. You just need to understand human behavior. When trust disappears, people look for exits. That is exactly what we are witnessing, not just with governments, but with individuals as well. At the same time, this financial shift is happening. We are moving rapidly toward a world defined by digital identity systems. These systems are being framed as convenient, secure, and inevitable. They are being sold as tools for safety, efficiency, and inclusion. What is rarely discussed is the trade-off. A digital identity tied to every aspect of life does not exist in a vacuum. It exists within systems of control, monitoring, and compliance. Once access to services, travel, healthcare, banking, and employment are linked to centralized digital credentials, privacy becomes optional at best. This is not a theory. It is already being tested and implemented in various forms around the world. Enhanced travel restrictions, increased monitoring, and conditional access are not futuristic concepts. They are present realities in many places, and the infrastructure to expand them is being built rapidly. When people say they feel like something bad is coming, what they are often sensing is the loss of autonomy, even if they do not have the language to describe it yet. Energy shortages are no longer hypothetical. We have already seen rolling blackouts, strained grids, and rising costs that disproportionately affect ordinary people. Access to medication and healthcare is becoming more complicated, more bureaucratic, and more expensive. Food costs continue to rise while quality and availability decline. Housing, once considered a basic milestone of adulthood, is now completely out of reach for millions of people, even those who work full time and do everything they were told to do. Layer on top of that the growing presence of curfews, emergency powers, and restrictive practices that can be activated with the flip of a switch. And you begin to see why so many people feel uneasy. Social cohesion is breaking down. Trust between institutions and the public is evaporating. Many people walk around with a sense of quiet dread, while others cling desperately to the idea that everything is normal because admitting otherwise would require them to confront uncomfortable truths. Look into the eyes of people around you, not in a dramatic way, not as an accusation, but as an observation. There is a heaviness there that did not exist before. Joy feels muted, optimism feels forced. People are exhausted, not just physically, but psychologically. Western society, in particular, feels hollowed out. The promises that were made are no longer being kept, and the pathways that once led to stability are now blocked. When people say there is no happiness left, they are not saying there are no moments of pleasure. They are saying that the underlying sense of security, meaning, and forward motion has been stripped away. Living in a system where everything feels conditional erodes the human spirit over time. When your access to basic necessities depends on constant compliance, constant participation, and constant approval, life stops feeling like life and starts feeling like a performance. So, what is the answer? What is the way forward in a world that feels increasingly hostile to independence and ownership? For some, the only logical response is to step away from the system as much as possible, not in a dramatic, impulsive way, but deliberately and strategically. Going off the grind does not mean disappearing into the wilderness out of panic. It means reducing dependency on systems that can be turned off or restricted without your consent. It means reclaiming, a measure of control over the fundamentals of survival. This is why so many people are talking about land, not luxury property, not status symbols, but usable land. A piece of ground where you can build something functional, raise animals for food and dairy, grow crops, and create resilience. A place where electricity and running water are conveniences, not lifelines. A place where you can function even when systems fail or access is denied. This idea is often mocked or dismissed as extreme by people who cannot imagine a world where the grid is unreliable or the bank says no. But history is filled with examples of societies where these exact scenarios played out. The difference now is that everything is more centralized, more interconnected, and therefore more fragile. When centralized systems fail, they fail broadly. Financial independence is a critical part of this conversation. If your entire existence depends on access to a single bank account that can be frozen, limited, or restricted, you are not truly in control. This is where alternative forms of money and value storage come into play. Crypto, when used responsibly, is not about speculation or hype. It is about having access to value outside traditional gatekeepers. It is about optionality. Bartering, skills, and tangible goods regain importance in times of instability. When supply chains falter and digital access is restricted, what you can produce, repair, or trade becomes far more valuable than abstract numbers on a screen. This is not nostalgia, this is practicality. We are also moving rapidly toward a world where ownership itself is being redefined. Physical media, once considered outdated, suddenly looks very different when everything else becomes subscription based. DVDs, Blu rays, physical games, old consoles, CDs, books. These are not just relics. They represent permanence in a world obsessed with access instead of ownership. When content can be edited, removed, or revoked at any time. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. Owning a physical copy becomes an act of independence. When hardware is designed to be locked down, always online, and remotely controlled, older technology becomes valuable precisely because it cannot be altered from afar. Old becomes gold, not because it is trendy, but because it is stable. We are moving toward a reality where you are not allowed to own anything outright. Housing becomes a perpetual rental. Transportation becomes a service. Entertainment becomes a license. Even basic functionality may be gated behind subscriptions and compliance requirements. Life itself begins to resemble a subscription service where access is contingent on behavior. This is not the nightmare many people sense but struggle to articulate. A world where everything is conditional, monitored, and revocable. A world where opting out is framed as irresponsible or dangerous. A world where walking away is treated as failure instead of self preservation. And yet, walking away may be the only sane response to a system that no longer serves the people within it. This does not mean giving up, it does not mean despair. It means choosing a different path. It means recognizing when a structure is unsalvageable and refusing to sacrifice your future to maintain the illusion that it will somehow fix itself. Societies like systems have life cycles. When they reach a point where control replaces trust and compliance replaces cooperation, decline accelerates. We are at that point now. Many people will continue pretending everything is fine until they are forced to confront reality. Others are quietly preparing, adjusting, and repositioning their lives. They are not waiting for permission. They are not asking for validation. They are taking responsibility for their own survival and dignity. This is not about fear. It is about clarity. When we talk about people walking away, especially men walking away, it is important to understand that this is not happening in isolation and it is not driven by a single issue. It is the result of pressure building from multiple directions at once: economic pressure, social pressure, legal pressure, and a growing realization that the effort required to participate no longer produces proportional returns. For generations, men were told that if they worked hard, followed the rules, built skills, and sacrificed their time and energy, stability and respect would follow. That equation has quietly collapsed, and many are only now realizing that they are still being held to the old expectations while the rewards have been removed. This realization does not arrive suddenly for most people. It builds slowly through lived experience. It shows up when someone works harder every year but feels poorer, not just financially, but mentally and emotionally. It appears when effort is met with indifference, when loyalty is treated as disposable, and when systems designed to support families instead become sources of risk and punishment. Over time, participation starts to feel less like contribution and more like exposure. As economic pressure increases, the margin for error disappears. One unexpected expense, one medical issue, one job loss, one bureaucratic delay can cascade into serious consequences. In a system with no buffer, people become cautious. They take fewer risks, They delay major life decisions and they begin to question whether full participation is even rational anymore. This is not laziness, this is adaptation. At the same time, the cultural narrative continues to demand more while offering less. Responsibility is emphasized without authority. Obligation is emphasized without protection. Many men feel expected to provide, to absorb stress, to remain composed, and to accept outcomes they have little control over. When frustration is expressed, it is often dismissed or reframed as a personal failing rather than a systemic issue. Over time, silence replaces engagement. This silence is often mistaken for apathy, but it is something else entirely. It is withdrawal. It is the decision to conserve energy, to stop investing in systems that no longer reciprocate, and to redirect effort towards survival and self preservation. Walking away is not about rebellion, it is about opting out of an arrangement that has become one sided. This pattern is not limited to one country or one culture. It is visible across the Western world and increasingly beyond it. Declining workforce participation, delayed family formation, reduced consumer spending, and a general disengagement from traditional milestones are all symptoms of the same underlying shift. People are no longer convinced that the future being offered is worth the cost of admission. Technology has accelerated this process. Constant connectivity has made it impossible to fully disengage from stress. Work follows people home. Expectations are continuous. Surveillance, both formal and informal, is normalized. At the same time, technology has exposed contradictions that were previously hidden. People can see how wealth is distributed, how rules are applied unevenly, and how narratives shift depending on who is affected. This transparency has eroded trust. When trust erodes, people stop building long term plans within the system. Instead, they focus on portability, skills that can be used anywhere, assets that cannot be easily seized or devalued overnight, lifestyles that can be scaled down if necessary. This is not defeatism. It is strategic thinking in an unstable environment. This is where the idea of resilience becomes central. Resilience is not about toughness for its own sake, it is about flexibility. It is about having options when circumstances change. A resilient person is not dependent on a single employer, a single income stream, a single institution, or a single location. They understand that stability in the modern world comes from redundancy and adaptability, not blind trust. This mindset naturally leads people away from dense urban centers and toward environments where dependency is reduced. High density living magnifies vulnerability. When everything you need is external and controlled by others, disruptions hit harder. Rising rent, energy costs, and regulatory complexity make it increasingly difficult to justify staying in places that no longer offer opportunity in return. Rural and semi rural living, once dismissed as impractical or regressive, is being reconsidered, not as an escape fantasy, but as a calculated move toward autonomy. Space allows for production instead of consumption. Land allows for food instead of reliance. Distance provides insulation from some of the volatility that characterizes modern life. This shift is not about rejecting modernity. It is about selecting which parts of modernity are worth keeping. Internet access can coexist with self sufficiency. Technology can be used as a tool rather than a leash. The goal is not isolation, the goal is sovereignty at the personal level. Financial sovereignty plays a major role in this transition. Traditional banking systems are built on assumptions that no longer hold true for many people. They assume stable employment, predictable income, and uninterrupted access. When those assumptions fail, the system becomes punitive. Fees, restrictions, and delays compound stress rather than alleviate it. This is why alternative financial tools have gained attention, not because they are perfect, but because they offer choice. Having access to money outside conventional systems provides a measure of security. It is not about abandoning one system entirely, but about not being trapped in it. Diversification applies to life as much as it does to investing. Physical assets regain relevance in uncertain times. Tools, equipment, spare parts, and durable goods hold value because they solve real problems. They do not depend on networks or permissions to function. The same is true of knowledge. Knowing how to repair, build, grow, and adapt becomes more valuable than credentials that only matter within fragile systems. Education itself is being reevaluated. Traditional pathways often involve significant cost with diminishing returns. Many people are questioning whether formal credentials still justify the debt and time required. Instead, practical learning, apprenticeships, and self directed education are gaining appeal. This reflects a broader shift away from abstract promises toward tangible outcomes. As this transition unfolds, friction increases between those who are adapting and those who remain invested in maintaining the status quo. Institutions depend on participation. When participation declines, pressure is applied to bring people back into alignment. This pressure can take many forms: moral appeals, financial incentives, regulatory adjustments, and social stigma. The goal is to restore compliance, not to address underlying issues. This creates a widening gap between official narratives and lived reality. People are told that conditions are improving while their daily experience suggests otherwise. They are told to remain optimistic while absorbing more risk. Over time, this disconnect breeds cynicism. Cynicism then hardens into disengagement. Disengagement is often misinterpreted as irresponsibility, but it is frequently the opposite. It is a recognition that the rules of the game have changed and that continuing to play as if they have not is dangerous. Those who walk away are not abandoning responsibility, they are redefining it. Responsibility shifts from pleasing institutions to protecting oneself and one's future. It becomes less about status and more about sustainability, less about appearances and more about function. This is a profound psychological shift, and it does not happen without resistance or grief. Letting go of old expectations can feel like failure, even when it is necessary. Many people struggle with this transition because they were taught that success looks a certain way. Career progression, property ownership in specific locations, visible consumption, and social validation were presented as universal goals. When these become unattainable or undesirable, people are left without a clear map. Walking away requires building a new definition of success from scratch. That new definition is often quieter. It prioritizes peace over prestige, time over titles, stability over scale. This does not mean ambition disappears. It means ambition is redirected toward goals that are within personal control. The satisfaction comes from competence and independence rather than approval. Community also changes shape. Instead of large, abstract networks, people gravitate towards smaller, trust based groups. Mutual aid, shared knowledge, and cooperation replace performative connection. These communities are not built around ideology, but around practicality. They exist to solve problems, not to signal virtue. As systems become more complex and less forgiving, simplicity becomes a strength. Fewer obligations, fewer dependencies, and fewer points of failure reduce stress and increase resilience. This simplicity is often mistaken for regression, but it is more accurately described as optimization under constraint. The future many people envision is not one of endless growth and convenience, it is one of balance and durability. The goal is not to dominate the system, but to survive it with dignity intact. This requires honesty about where trends are heading and a willingness to make uncomfortable choices early rather than desperate ones later. Walking away, in this context, is not an act of anger, it is an act of clarity. It is the decision to stop sacrificing one's life to a structure that no longer rewards sacrifice. It is the refusal to be ground down by expectations that are no longer realistic or fair. This is why the phrase men walking away resonates so deeply. It captures a collective realization that participation is optional and that opting out can be a rational response to imbalance. It is not about hostility towards society, it is about self respect. To understand where this is heading, we have to talk honestly about ownership because ownership is the quiet foundation of freedom. When you own something outright, you are insulated from permission. You do not need approval to use it, maintain it, or keep it. When ownership is replaced by access, everything changes. Access can be revoked, access can be modified, access can be conditioned. And the modern world is moving very deliberately away from ownership and toward managed access. This shift is often framed as progress. We are told that subscriptions are more efficient, that sharing is more sustainable, and that centralized systems are safer. What is rarely acknowledged is that these systems require compliance to function. When your home, your transportation, your communication tools, your entertainment, and your finances all exist behind digital gates, your behavior becomes the price of admission. This is not an abstract concern. It is the logical endpoint of a system designed around control rather than trust. Housing is a clear example. For much of modern history, owning a home was considered a cornerstone of stability. It provided predictability, security, and a sense of permanence. Today, ownership is increasingly out of reach while renting becomes the default. Renting is not inherently bad, but permanent renting removes leverage from the individual. It creates a class of people who are always temporary, always conditional, and always one policy change away from displacement. The same pattern is emerging across other areas of life. Transportation shifts from ownership to services. Entertainment shifts from physical media to streaming licenses. Software shifts from one time purchases to recurring fees. If even tools and appliances are being designed to require ongoing connectivity and authorization, the cumulative effect is a world where nothing truly belongs to you, even if you pay for it indefinitely. This erosion of ownership has psychological consequences. When nothing feels permanent, people hesitate to invest emotionally. Why commit deeply to a place, a system, or a future that can be altered without your input? Over time, this uncertainty breeds detachment. Detachment then gets mislabeled as apathy, when in reality it is a rational response to instability. Identity becomes entangled in this system as well. Digital identity frameworks promise convenience, but they also consolidate control. When your identity is tied to centralized databases that determine what you can access, where you can go, and what services you can use, autonomy becomes fragile. Identity stops being something you possess and becomes something you are granted. This is why the idea of preparation resonates with so many people. Preparation is not about panic. It is about acknowledging that trends have consequences and choosing to respond before options narrow. Those who prepare early have flexibility. Those who wait are forced to accept whatever terms are offered. Preparation looks different for different people, but the underlying principles are consistent. Reduce dependency, increase redundancy, preserve optionality. These are not extreme ideas. They are basic risk management strategies applied to everyday life. Reducing dependency means identifying which systems you rely on completely and asking whether alternatives exist. If your food comes exclusively from complex supply chains, what happens when those chains are disrupted? If your income comes from a single source, what happens when that source disappears? If your savings exist only within systems you do not control, what happens when access is delayed or restricted? Increasing redundancy means having backups, not out of paranoia, but out of prudence, multiple ways to communicate, multiple ways to store value, multiple ways to meet basic needs. Redundancy turns crises into inconveniences and inconveniences into manageable problems. Preserving optionality means keeping choices open. It means avoiding commitments that lock you into unfavorable conditions. It means valuing mobility, adaptability, and skill acquisition over static status markers. Optionality is power in uncertain environments. This mindset stands in stark contrast to the dominant cultural narrative, which encourages maximum participation, maximum leverage, and maximum exposure. Debt is normalized. Long term obligations are celebrated. Flexibility is sacrificed for appearances. When conditions are stable, this can work. When conditions are volatile, it becomes dangerous. Many people sense this intuitively. They feel the weight of obligations they can no longer justify. They feel the anxiety of knowing that one disruption could unravel everything they have built. This anxiety is not weakness, it is information. Ignoring that information does not make it go away. It only delays the reckoning. As more people quietly reposition their lives, a divide emerges between those who adapt and those who cling to familiar structures. This divide is not ideological, it is practical. One group prioritizes resilience, the other prioritizes normalcy. Both believe they are acting rationally, but only one is adjusting to changing conditions. Institutions, by their nature, resist change until it is unavoidable. They rely on momentum, tradition, and compliance. When participation declines, they seek to restore it, not by reforming underlying issues, but by encouraging belief. Messaging intensifies, reassurances multiply, metrics are selectively highlighted. The goal is confidence, not accuracy. This creates a strange environment where official optimism coexists with private anxiety. People are told that things are improving while their lived experience suggests otherwise. This dissonance erodes credibility. Once credibility is lost, messaging loses its power. At that point, people stop listening and start observing. They look at what others are doing, not what they are saying. They notice who is selling assets, who is diversifying, who is quietly exiting certain arrangements. These signals carry more weight than any press release. The idea of walking away becomes less radical in this context. It becomes a logical conclusion drawn from observation. If a system demands more while delivering less, reducing engagement is not rebellion, it is efficiency. This is particularly evident in how people approach work. Traditional employment structures assume long term loyalty in exchange for stability. When stability disappears, loyalty becomes irrational. People shift toward contract work, remote arrangements, and independent income streams, not because they reject work, but because they reject dependency. Work becomes transactional rather than identity defining. Skills are valued over titles. Output matters more than presence. This shift unsettles organizations built on hierarchy and control, but it empowers individuals who prioritize autonomy. The same reevaluation applies to consumption. Endless consumption once promised happiness and status. Now it often delivers debt and clutter. Minimalism, not as an aesthetic but as a strategy, gains appeal. Owning fewer things reduces vulnerability. Fewer payments mean fewer obligations. Fewer obligations mean greater freedom of movement. This does not mean living without comfort or enjoyment. It means choosing deliberately rather than reflexively. It means asking whether each addition to life increases resilience or merely increases complexity. Relationships also change under this lens. Partnerships built on mutual respect and shared goals become essential. Arrangements built on obligation without reciprocity become untenable. People become more selective, not more cynical. They seek alignment rather than validation. Community, too, becomes intentional. Large, impersonal networks lose relevance. Smaller circles built on trust and competence become invaluable. In times of uncertainty, knowing who you can rely on matters more than how many people know your name. This is where the broader implications of men walking away come into focus. It is not just about withdrawing from certain social expectations, it is about redefining participation itself. Participation becomes conditional on fairness, transparency, and mutual benefit. When those conditions are absent, disengagement follows. Critics often frame this as selfishness or avoidance. In reality, it is a recalibration of effort. People are still willing to contribute. They are simply unwilling to be exploited or ignored. Contribution without respect leads to burnout. Burnout leads to withdrawal. The system interprets withdrawal as a problem to be solved rather than a signal to be understood. This is a critical mistake. You cannot mandate engagement. You cannot coerce trust. You cannot shame people into believing in a future they no longer see. As disengagement spreads, attempts to reassert control often intensify. Rules become more detailed. Monitoring becomes more sophisticated. Compliance becomes more important than outcomes. This further accelerates withdrawal among those who value autonomy. The result is a feedback loop. Control breeds disengagement. Disengagement prompts more control. Eventually, the system becomes rigid and brittle. At that point, even minor disruptions can cause significant damage. Those who have walked away, partially or fully, are better positioned to weather these disruptions. They have fewer dependencies, fewer obligations, and more flexibility. They are not immune to challenges, but they are less exposed. This is not about predicting collapse. It is about recognizing fragility. Complex systems can function for long periods and then fail rapidly when certain thresholds are crossed. Preparation is not about timing collapse. It is about being ready for instability whenever it arises. The future is unlikely to be a single dramatic event. It will be uneven, fragmented, and unpredictable. Some areas will function relatively well, others will struggle. Access will vary, conditions will change. Adaptability will matter more than optimism. In such an environment, clarity becomes a form of protection. Seeing the world as it is, rather than as it was promised to be, allows for better decisions. Walking away from illusions is the first step toward building something real. This does not mean abandoning hope. It means grounding hope in reality rather than narratives. Hope built on false assumptions collapses easily. Hope built on competence, preparation, and self respect endures. If we are going to talk about sustainability in a serious way, we have to strip away the fantasy version of it and replace it with something grounded in reality. Sustainability is not about aesthetic lifestyles or curated images of self reliance. It is about building a life that does not collapse the moment external support is interrupted. It is about creating systems at the personal level that can absorb shock without breaking. This requires a mental shift first because most people have been conditioned to optimize for convenience rather than durability. Convenience feels good in the short term, but it creates fragility. When every need is met instantly by complex networks you do not control, your margin for error shrinks. Durability, on the other hand, often feels slower and less glamorous, but it builds resilience. It means choosing solutions that continue working under stress, not just under ideal conditions. This distinction matters more now than at any point in recent history. A sustainable life begins with understanding needs versus wants. Modern culture intentionally blurs this line because consumption drives profit. People are encouraged to treat comforts as necessities and upgrades as requirements. Over time, this inflates lifestyles until they become unmanageable. When conditions tighten, the entire structure becomes unsustainable. Reversing this process requires honesty and restraint. Food is one of the most immediate examples. Reliance on centralized food systems works well when logistics are smooth and prices are stable. When either of those variables changes, vulnerability becomes obvious. Building even partial food independence reduces stress dramatically. This does not require total self sufficiency, it requires redundancy. Growing some food, storing staples, and understanding basic preservation methods creates breathing room. The same principle applies to water. Clean water is fundamental, yet most people have never considered what happens if access is disrupted. Simple measures like storage, filtration, and alternative collection methods can turn a crisis into a manageable inconvenience. These are not extreme preparations, they are basic safeguards that previous generations considered normal. Energy follows the same pattern. Total independence is not necessary for resilience. Supplemental options matter. Backup power, alternative heating methods, and reduced reliance on fragile grids provide stability. The goal is not to disconnect entirely, but to avoid total dependency. When you have options, you retain agency. Housing plays a central role in sustainability because shelter anchors everything else. A sustainable living arrangement prioritizes functionality over status. Smaller, simpler structures are easier to maintain, easier to adapt, and less financially burdensome. They reduce exposure to debt and increase flexibility. This does not mean discomfort, it means efficiency. Debt is one of the most significant obstacles to sustainability. Debt locks future effort into fixed obligations regardless of changing conditions. When income becomes uncertain, debt becomes dangerous. Reducing debt increases resilience more than almost any other single action. This is not about austerity, it is about reducing leverage that works against you when conditions deteriorate. This is where walking away becomes not just philosophical, but practical. Walking away from unnecessary debt, unnecessary consumption, and unnecessary obligations creates space. Space allows for adaptation. Space allows for thinking. Space allows for rebuilding on your own terms. Psychologically, this transition can be difficult because it challenges deeply ingrained beliefs about success and worth. Many people equate busyness with value and accumulation with achievement. Letting go of these metrics can feel like failure, even when it leads to greater stability. This internal conflict is one of the hardest parts of the process. However, once the shift occurs, many people report a sense of relief. The constant pressure to keep up, to display progress, and to meet external expectations fades. In its place emerges a quieter form of confidence rooted in competence rather than approval. Knowing you can handle disruption changes how you move through the world. This confidence is not loud, it does not seek validation. It is built through small, practical wins. Fixing something instead of replacing it, producing instead of consuming, learning instead of outsourcing. These actions accumulate over time and reshape identity. Identity is important here because systems exert control most effectively through identity. When people define themselves primarily through roles assigned by institutions, they become vulnerable to those institutions. When identity is grounded in skills, values, and self trust, external pressure loses power. This is another reason why digital identity systems feel threatening to many people, even if they cannot articulate why. When identity becomes a credential managed by others, it becomes a lever. Levers can be pulled. Preparation involves loosening those levers wherever possible. This does not require isolation, it requires discernment, choosing when to engage and when to step back, choosing what to share and what to keep private, choosing which systems to participate in fully and which to use minimally. Privacy, once taken for granted, becomes a form of resilience, not secrecy, but discretion. In an environment where data is currency and behavior is tracked, reducing unnecessary exposure protects autonomy. This is not about paranoia, it is about proportional response. Sustainable living also requires recalibrating expectations around comfort and growth. Endless expansion, is not compatible with durability. Systems that demand constant growth eventually consume themselves. At the personal level, moderation allows stability. Growth still occurs, but it is organic rather than forced. This recalibration affects how people approach work and income. Instead of maximizing income at the cost of time and health, many prioritize income that is flexible, diversified, and aligned with their values. Lower overhead means less income is required to meet needs. This reduces pressure and increases freedom. Time becomes a valuable asset in this framework. Time allows for learning, maintenance, and relationship building. When life is structured around constant urgency, these activities are neglected. Sustainability requires slack. Slack is often mislabeled as inefficiency, but it is essential for resilience. This is why many people walking away from traditional structures do not immediately replace them with equally demanding alternatives. They allow for a period of adjustment. They experiment. They test assumptions. This phase can look unproductive from the outside, but it is foundational. Community plays a different role in sustainable living. It shifts from abstract social networks to practical cooperation. Shared resources, shared knowledge, and mutual support create resilience that no individual can achieve alone. These communities are often informal and low profile. Their strength lies in trust rather than scale. Trust itself becomes a scarce resource. It cannot be mandated or automated. It must be earned through consistency and reciprocity. Sustainable communities prioritize reliability over ideology. They focus on what works rather than what signals alignment. This stands in contrast to large scale systems that prioritize compliance metrics over outcomes. When rules become more important than results, inefficiency grows. People disengage because effort no longer leads to improvement. At the personal level, sustainability requires reversing this dynamic. Results matter more than appearances. The act of walking away, then, is not a rejection of responsibility. It is a rejection of inefficiency. It is the decision to invest energy where it produces tangible returns rather than symbolic ones. This is a rational response to constrained environments. As more people adopt this approach, social dynamics shift. Traditional markers of success lose influence. Quiet competence gains respect. The loudest voices often belong to those most invested in maintaining appearances, while the most stable individuals operate below the surface. This creates tension because systems depend on visibility. Participation must be seen to be measured. When people operate quietly, outside official metrics, systems lose insight and control. This is often interpreted as a threat. In response, pressure increases. Incentives are offered. Penalties are introduced. Participation is framed as moral obligation. These tactics may work temporarily, but they accelerate disengagement among those who value autonomy. The long term outcome of this dynamic is fragmentation. Instead of one unified system, multiple parallel systems emerge. Some people remain fully integrated, others operate partially outside. Still others build alternatives. This fragmentation reduces efficiency at scale, but increases resilience locally. From a personal perspective, navigating this landscape requires clarity. Knowing what you are optimizing for determines which trade offs you accept. If you optimize for approval, you will accept instability. If you optimize for resilience, you will accept simplicity. Neither path is easy, but only one aligns with long term sustainability in an uncertain world. The hardest part of this transition is letting go of the expectation that things will return to how they were. Nostalgia is powerful, but it can be dangerous. Preparing for a future that no longer exists wastes energy. Preparing for the world as it is becoming creates opportunity. This does not mean abandoning enjoyment or meaning, it means sourcing them differently. Fulfillment shifts from external validation to internal alignment. Satisfaction comes from capability rather than consumption. As people internalize this shift, fear diminishes. Uncertainty remains, but it becomes manageable. Fear thrives on helplessness. Preparation restores agency. Walking away, in this sense, is not about isolation, it is about alignment, aligning actions with reality, aligning values with behavior, aligning expectations with conditions. This alignment produces a form of calm that cannot be manufactured through optimism or denial. It comes from knowing that while you cannot control the world, you can control your response to it. When individual choices begin to scale, systems start to react. And this is where the situation becomes more visible and more tense. Systems are designed around predictability. They rely on participation rates, compliance patterns, and behavioral assumptions. When large numbers of people quietly change how they live, spend, work, and engage, those assumptions begin to fail. What looks like a personal lifestyle adjustment at the individual level becomes a structural problem at scale. This is why walking away is often met with resistance, even hostility. It is not because every individual choice is threatening on its own, but because aggregated disengagement undermines the foundations of systems built on constant input. Fewer workers means less output. Less consumption means reduced revenue. Less trust means weaker legitimacy. Systems can tolerate criticism, but they struggle to tolerate indifference. Indifference is dangerous because it cannot be easily corrected through messaging. You can argue with critics, you can negotiate with reformers, you cannot easily compel people who have stopped caring. When people no longer believe in the future being offered, persuasion loses its power. This is why narratives intensify during periods of instability. Messaging becomes more urgent, more emotional, and more repetitive. Optimism is amplified. Dissent is minimized. Participation is framed not just as beneficial, but as necessary and virtuous. The goal is not understanding, but re engagement. However, this strategy only works when lived experience roughly aligns with the narrative. When there is too much distance between what people are told and what they experience, trust collapses further. At that point, narratives stop informing behavior and start provoking skepticism. We are already seeing this dynamic play out. Official statements emphasize resilience, recovery, and progress, while everyday reality tells a different story for many people. Costs rise faster than incomes. Stability feels conditional. Long term planning feels risky. This gap is not sustainable. As a result, people increasingly look to each other rather than to institutions for cues. They observe who is coping well, who seems calm, who appears prepared. These signals matter more than slogans. When people see others stepping back, simplifying, and regaining control, it legitimizes those choices. This is how cultural shifts happen quietly before they become obvious. They start at the margins among people willing to accept social friction in exchange for autonomy. Over time, those margins expand. The men walking away concept fits squarely into this pattern. It is not a coordinated movement, it does not require organization or leadership. It emerges organically when incentives change. When participation no longer makes sense, withdrawal becomes rational. This withdrawal is often subtle. It looks like reduced engagement rather than overt protest. Fewer hours worked beyond necessity, less consumption, delayed or avoided commitments that carry long term risk, quiet exits from systems that demand too much for too little in return. From the system's perspective, this behavior is difficult to address because it does not break rules. It simply exploits the option not to overextend. It follows the letter of expectations while rejecting the spirit of endless sacrifice. This creates a kind of stalemate. Systems push for more engagement. Individuals conserve energy. Tension builds not through confrontation, but through inertia. Progress slows. Productivity stagnates. Frustration grows on both sides. Historically, systems respond to this kind of pressure in predictable ways. They attempt reform, they attempt incentives, they attempt enforcement. The order varies, but the pattern repeats. Reform is often superficial, incentives become temporary, enforcement becomes more visible. None of these approaches address the root cause, which is a breakdown in perceived fairness and value exchange. When people feel that effort is no longer rewarded proportionally, no amount of messaging can restore enthusiasm. This is where autonomy becomes the, the central theme of the future. Autonomy is not about rejecting all structure. It is about choosing which structures to participate in and on what terms. People increasingly want control over their time, their labor, and their lives. Autonomy does not require isolation, it requires boundaries, clear limits on what you are willing to give and what you expect in return. Systems that respect boundaries retain participants. Systems that violate them drive people away. At the collective level, this shift forces a reckoning. Societies built on voluntary participation must either restore trust or adapt to reduced engagement. Societies built on compulsion face increasing resistance and inefficiency. The challenge is that restoring trust is harder than enforcing compliance. Trust requires accountability, transparency, and reciprocity. Compliance requires only enforcement. In the short term, enforcement appears easier. In the long term, it erodes legitimacy. This trade off defines the coming period. Choices made now will shape whether societies move toward renewal or rigidity. For individuals, the question becomes simpler but more personal. Where do you place your energy? What do you invest in? What do you walk away from? Walking away is not a single decision. It is a series of choices made over time. Each choice reduces exposure and increases alignment. Each choice trades convenience for control, visibility for privacy, and scale for stability. This process often involves grief. Letting go of expected futures can be painful. Many people mourn the life they were told they would have. This grief is real and valid. Ignoring it only prolongs the transition. But grief eventually gives way to clarity. When illusions fade, reality becomes easier to work with. New goals emerge that are better suited to current conditions. Satisfaction shifts from external benchmarks to internal coherence. This is why many people who have stepped back report feeling lighter despite uncertainty. They no longer feel trapped in a race that never ends. They are no longer chasing approval from systems that do not reciprocate. This does not mean disengagement from everything. It means selective engagement, choosing projects, relationships, and commitments that align with long term well being rather than short term validation. In practical terms, this often looks like smaller, more resilient lives, lives with lower overhead and fewer dependencies, lives where failure in one area does not cascade into total collapse. This approach is sometimes criticized as unambitious or defeatist. In reality, it is strategic. It prioritizes survivability over spectacle. It recognizes that durability matters more than growth when conditions are unstable. This perspective also changes how success is measured. Success becomes the ability to adapt, to recover, and to continue moving forward under pressure. It is not about maximizing output at all costs. It is about maintaining agency. As more people adopt this framework, the social fabric changes, norms shift, expectations adjust. What once seemed radical becomes reasonable. What once seemed irresponsible becomes prudent. We are already seeing early signs of this shift. Interest in self sufficiency, alternative living arrangements, skill based livelihoods, and decentralized systems continues to grow. These are not fringe interests, they are responses to lived experience. The pace of change may appear slow, but it is cumulative. Each person who steps back slightly reduces the load on themselves and increases pressure on systems to adapt. Over time, these small adjustments add up. This does not guarantee positive outcomes at the macro level. Transitions are messy. There will be friction, resistance, and setbacks. But at the individual level, preparation and clarity consistently produce better outcomes than denial. This is why the message of walking away resonates now more than ever. It speaks to a shared intuition that the old contract has been broken and that waiting for it to be repaired is risky. Walking away does not mean abandoning society. It means refusing to be consumed by systems that no longer serve human needs. It means prioritizing life over metrics, dignity over appearances, and resilience over growth. In the coming years, these choices will become more visible. The divide between those who adapt and those who cling to familiar structures will widen. This is not a moral judgment, it is a structural reality. Those who prepare will not be immune to challenges, but they will be less exposed. They will have options when others have none. They will have leverage where others have obligation. This is not about predicting doom. It is about acknowledging risk. Risk ignored does not disappear. Risk managed becomes survivable. As this phase unfolds, clarity will matter more than optimism. Preparation will matter more than belief. Agency will matter more than reassurance. Walking away is ultimately about reclaiming agency in a world that increasingly seeks to manage behavior through dependency. It is about saying no to arrangements that erode dignity and yes to paths that preserve it. This is the deeper meaning behind men walking away. It is not a slogan, it is a diagnosis and a response. The emotional cost of staying in a system that no longer works for you is rarely discussed honestly, yet it is one of the most significant forces shaping behavior today. People often focus on the external pressures, finances, policies, obligations, but the internal toll is quieter and more corrosive. It shows up as chronic stress, persistent fatigue, irritability, and a sense of being trapped in routines that no longer make sense. Over time, this internal friction wears people down far more effectively than any external enforcement ever could. Many people know at some level that their current path is unsustainable, yet they remain on it anyway. This is not because they are unaware or unintelligent. It is because leaving carries emotional risks that feel just as real as financial ones. Walking away means admitting that the plan you were given does not work. It means confronting the possibility that years of effort were invested in something that cannot deliver what was promised. That realization can be deeply unsettling. There is also the fear of judgment. Modern society places a high value on visible participation. Careers, relationships, consumption patterns, and even opinions are constantly evaluated. Stepping back invites scrutiny. People worry about being seen as failures, quitters, or outsiders. This fear keeps many locked into arrangements they privately resent. Another powerful force is sunk cost. The more time, money, and identity someone has invested in a system, the harder it becomes to step away from it. Walking away feels like erasing past effort, even when staying guarantees future loss. This psychological trap is well documented, yet extremely difficult to escape without conscious effort. Family expectations also play a role. Many people carry not only their own hopes, but the expectations of parents, partners, and communities. Walking away can feel like letting others down, even when those expectations were built on outdated assumptions. The weight of obligation can keep people moving in directions they know are wrong. Then there is uncertainty. Staying, even when miserable, offers predictability. Leaving introduces the unknown. Human beings are wired to prefer familiar discomfort over unfamiliar risk. This instinct made sense in stable environments. In unstable environments, it can be dangerous. Understanding these forces is critical because walking away without awareness can lead to unnecessary damage. This is not about burning bridges or rejecting everything at once. It is about navigating a transition intelligently. Walking away is best understood as a process, not an event. It begins internally with a shift in priorities and expectations. Before any external changes occur, people often stop emotionally investing in outcomes they no longer control. They detach their sense of worth from external validation. This internal withdrawal creates space for clearer thinking. From there, practical steps follow. Commitments are evaluated, some are reduced, others are renegotiated. New obligations are taken on cautiously, if at all. The goal is not to eliminate responsibility, but to align it with capacity and values. This gradual approach allows people to test alternatives without catastrophic risk. Side projects replace full leaps. Skill development happens quietly. Financial buffers are built. Over time, dependency decreases and confidence increases. This approach also preserves relationships where possible. Walking away does not require hostility. In many cases, it simply means redefining boundaries. Some people will not understand. Others will quietly respect the choice, even if they cannot articulate why. It is important to recognize that not everyone will walk away at the same pace or to the same degree. Circumstances vary, responsibilities vary. What matters is direction, not speed. Even small shifts toward autonomy reduce stress and increase resilience. One of the most difficult aspects of this transition is sitting with ambiguity. There is often a period where the old structure has been loosened, but the new one is not fully formed. This in between state can feel uncomfortable and disorienting. Productivity may dip, confidence may fluctuate. This is normal. Society tends to pathologize this phase, labeling it as stagnation or indecision. In reality, it is a recalibration period. Old assumptions are being dismantled, new frameworks are being tested. This takes time. Those who rush this phase often recreate the same problems in a different form. They leave one rigid structure only to enter another. True walking away requires patience and reflection. This is where storytelling becomes important, not as fiction, but as self narrative. People need a new story about what they are doing and why. Without a coherent narrative, doubt creeps in. The old metrics no longer apply, but new ones have not yet been established. A sustainable narrative emphasizes agency rather than escape. It frames walking away as a choice towards something, not merely away from something. This subtle shift has profound psychological effects. It replaces shame with intention. Intention anchors behavior during uncertainty. It provides a reference point when external feedback is inconsistent or negative. It allows people to absorb criticism without internalizing it. Another challenge is isolation. As people disengage from mainstream paths, they may feel disconnected from peers who remain invested. Conversations change, shared assumptions dissolve. This can be lonely if not managed carefully. This is why selective community becomes essential. Not everyone needs to understand your choices. You only need a few people who share similar values or who respect autonomy. These connections provide grounding and perspective. Importantly, walking away does not mean rejecting cooperation. It means choosing cooperation deliberately. It means working with others where goals align rather than defaulting to participation out of obligation. Emotionally, this transition often leads to a recalibration of ambition. Ambition does not disappear, but it becomes more personal. Instead of climbing predefined ladders, people set their own benchmarks. These benchmarks tend to be qualitative rather than quantitative. Peace of mind becomes a legitimate goal. So does time flexibility. So does the ability to respond to change without panic. These outcomes are rarely celebrated publicly, but they are deeply valued privately. Over time, many people report that their emotional baseline improves after walking away, even if external conditions remain uncertain. The reduction in cognitive dissonance alone can be significant. Living in alignment reduces internal conflict. This does not mean fear disappears, it means fear becomes proportionate. Instead of a constant background hum, it becomes situational. This allows for clearer decision making. There is also a reclaiming of dignity that occurs. When people stop forcing themselves into roles that diminish them, self respect returns. This self respect is quiet and internal. It does not require validation. Dignity matters because systems that rely on compliance often erode it gradually. Small compromises accumulate. Over time, people feel smaller. Walking away interrupts this process. At a broader level, the psychological shift has implications beyond the individual. When enough people reclaim agency, cultural expectations adjust, narratives lose their grip, new possibilities emerge. This is not a sudden revolution, it is a slow rebalancing. Old structures persist, but their influence weakens. Parallel paths gain legitimacy. From the outside, this can look like disengagement or decline. From the inside, it feels like correction. The danger is not in people walking away. The danger is in forcing people to stay in systems that no longer serve them. That pressure breeds resentment, burnout, and eventual collapse. Walking away early, thoughtfully, and deliberately is far less destructive than being pushed out suddenly by crisis. This is why preparation and emotional readiness matter as much as practical planning. Without emotional grounding, even well prepared people can make reactive decisions under stress. Walking away is an act of maturity when done with clarity. It acknowledges limits, it respects reality, it prioritizes sustainability over appearances. As this transition becomes more common, it challenges long held assumptions about success, duty, and identity. These assumptions will not disappear quietly. There will be debate, criticism, and resistance. But beneath that noise, a quieter shift continues. People choosing alignment over approval, people choosing resilience over status, people choosing autonomy over dependency. This is the real story unfolding beneath headlines and narratives. It is not dramatic, but it is consequential. At the end of all of this analysis, preparation, and reflection, the most important question is not what kind of world we are moving into, but what kind of life is actually worth protecting within it. That question cuts through ideology, politics, and noise. It forces a personal reckoning that no institution can answer for you. Every system, no matter how powerful, ultimately competes with your finite time, energy, and attention. Once you understand that, participation stops being automatic and starts becoming intentional. A life worth protecting is not defined by constant validation or external approval. It is defined by coherence. Coherence between what you believe, what you do, and what you tolerate. When those elements align, stress decreases even when uncertainty remains. When they are out of alignment, no amount of comfort or distraction can compensate for the internal strain. Many people reach this realization quietly. There is no dramatic moment, there is simply a growing awareness that continuing on the same path feels increasingly wrong. This awareness does not demand immediate action, but it does demand honesty. Ignoring it requires constant effort. Listening to it requires courage. Courage in this context is not about confrontation, it is about restraint. It is about saying no to paths that extract more than they return. It is about stepping back when pressure increases instead of leaning forward out of habit. This kind of courage rarely receives applause, but it preserves something far more valuable than recognition: walking away when done deliberately, is not an abandonment of responsibility. It is a redefinition of it. Responsibility shifts from maintaining appearances to maintaining viability, from satisfying expectations to safeguarding the future. This shift does not absolve anyone of effort, it redirects effort toward outcomes that matter. As the world becomes more complex and more managed, simplicity becomes an act of intelligence. Simplifying obligations, simplifying dependencies, simplifying goals. Each simplification removes a point of failure. Each simplification restores a measure of control. Control is often misunderstood as dominance over others. In reality, meaningful control begins with oneself. Control over time, control over attention, control over exposure to risk. These forms of control are quiet, but they are foundational. This is why the future belongs less to those who chase every opportunity and more to those who choose carefully. Optionality will matter more than scale. Flexibility will matter more than status. Those who can adapt without panic will fare better than those who rely on rigid plans. This does not mean disengaging from the world entirely. It means engaging on your terms, choosing when to participate and when to step back, choosing which battles are worth energy and which are not. This discernment is not apathy, it is wisdom earned through observation. A sustainable life is not insulated from hardship, but it is designed to absorb it. It anticipates disruption without obsessing over it. It builds buffers, not fantasies. It values preparation over prediction. Preparation is empowering because it shifts focus from fear to capability. When you know you can handle disruption, uncertainty loses its grip. You stop scanning constantly for threats and start making measured decisions. This mindset changes how you relate to news, narratives, and pressure. You stop reacting emotionally to every signal. You begin evaluating information through the lens of relevance rather than urgency. This alone restores a sense of calm that many people have lost. Calm is not complacency, it is clarity without panic. It allows you to see patterns instead of chasing headlines. It allows you to respond rather than react. As more people adopt this posture, the cultural tone shifts. Hysteria loses influence. Extremes lose appeal. Quiet competence gains respect. The loudest voices become less persuasive as people prioritize lived experience over messaging. This does not eliminate conflict or difficulty, but it changes the terrain. Instead of mass participation driven by pressure, engagement becomes selective and intentional. Systems that adapt to this reality remain relevant. Systems that do not grow brittle. At the personal level, this means making peace with limits, accepting that you cannot save everything or fix everything, choosing where your contribution matters most, letting go of the need to prove yourself constantly. And many people discover that once they stop performing for systems, they have more energy for real relationships, meaningful work, and personal growth. The paradox is that stepping back often creates more space to move forward. Forward in this sense does not mean upward on a predefined ladder. It means deeper into alignment, that deeper into competence, deeper into a life that feels livable. This is the quiet promise behind men walking away. It is not about resentment or withdrawal for its own sake. It is about preserving dignity in an environment that increasingly devalues it. It is about choosing self respect over endless obligation. Walking away does not require announcing it, it does not require approval. It begins with a series of small, consistent choices that prioritize sustainability over spectacle. Over time, these choices compound. Stress decreases, confidence grows, direction clarifies, life becomes less about endurance and more about intention. There will always be voices insisting that you must stay fully engaged, fully invested, fully exposed to prove your worth. These voices speak for systems, not for you. You are not obligated to sacrifice your well being to validate structures that no longer serve you. You are allowed to choose a different path. You are allowed to value peace. You are allowed to prepare quietly. You're allowed to walk away without hatred and without apology. The world ahead will not be easy, but it does not have to be dehumanizing. Those who retain agency, clarity, and restraint will navigate it better than those who cling desperately to fading promises. This is not a call to fear. It is a call to awareness, not a call to panic, but to preparation, not a call to isolation, but to discernment. Now, I want to hear from you. What did you think about what we discussed in this video? Do you agree with this direction? Do you feel the same tension and shift happening around you? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. Because this conversation matters and your perspective adds to it. Like the video, if you like it, don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.